So some people probably may have questions directly for the speakers earlier, but if somebody else wants to talk about what it's like to be a youth advisory panel member as well, I'm sure Josh would be happy to speak to that. I'm going to hand over to Alex now, who's going to start our question session.
Yeah, thanks. I would like to proceed to the question section. So is there some questions from the public maybe? Can I see some hands? Oh, yep.
You have a roving mic.
Can you just, one sec, maybe I made a mistake. I think, yes, you have a question. Can you just put your hands up for our volunteer to pass your microphone? Yep. Great. It's really hard because of this lighting.
Yeah. We're blinded by the light,
yeah,
so we can't see what's going on.
Who's wearing white, actually, I cannot see him.
So my question is more directed on the refugees and what mental health programs have been created in those communities here.
Would you like to address?
Yeah.
Suppose I open it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can go first, or?
Yep. You go.
Okay, so I'm going to speak, so basically I have some professional experience as well because I'm also a law graduate, soon to be admitted lawyer, spent some time, almost again, and spent quite a bit of time volunteering in the human rights law space, but also just in our capacity we have young people with a refugee perspective on our youth advisory group as well. I will start off by saying that, like Victoria itself, so I'm from Melbourne, Victoria, and we've got quite a large contingent of refugees and asylum seekers who are currently either in the process of being, waiting to be recognised as a refugee, gaining refugee status, and they're all on temporary humanitarian visas at the moment, which is essentially kind of like living in limbo. Many people don't have work rights. And that they're forced to stay on temporary visas for 3 or 5 year periods at a time and then reprove their refugee status, basically. And within that, there are some specialist mental health organisations. There's one called Foundation House, and there's quite a few refugee settlement services that are especially funded by the government to provide support services like mental health services to their families. Whether or not that always extends to young people is a problem, is what I would say. And just as a volunteer in my experience working with refugees from Sri Lanka, because I speak Tamil as well, is that especially for people from those South Asian backgrounds, it's very difficult, and for children it's even more difficult. So refugee settlement services can only do so much to provide counselling and support, but there is a lot more that needs to be done in order to reach their children, basically. So there are support services there, but they're under a lot of pressure, and the fact that there's so many people waiting to achieve refugee status, or they're already been rejected and they're waiting in long drawn out court processes, we are facing quite a big challenge when it comes to actually assisting and supporting the young people, because a lot of these families are having children. Their legal processes can take anywhere from 6 months to 6 years. So it's going to present a really big challenge going forward, and also just recognising that a lot of people are forced to settle in rural areas as well. So recognising that we need to put more services in rural areas is a really big problem, because not all services have funding for interpreters, which if you're from a refugee background and very new, language is obviously quite a problem, and a lack of bicultural workers is also another problem.
Can I just add to that really quickly and say that I think this problem has fallen between the gaps because the youth mental health services think that the refugee migration agencies are dealing with it, and the refugee migration agencies think youth mental health are. So that's why this group has fallen between the gaps.
Great. We're going to move to a question now for Nawira, and through the app. And for Nawira, firstly, it's a wow coming from the audience. What do you do to support yourself in sharing your story and traumatic experiences?
That's a very good question. I think I'm doing like self-reflection now. I think the main thing that comes to my mind is, these are very painful things that we talk about, but for me, it's about using this pain to fuel my purpose. Which I mentioned just now, is to heal and help heal. So yes, what keeps me going is just being able to do that and sharing whatever I've experienced, because I know that it will benefit someone in some way. I started just, by hoping to just reach out to even just one person. And until today, that is what I still want to do, just reaching out to that one person. In fact, I think that, as much as we talk about advocacy and all the big campaigns that we have, even in my country, or even the big events that we have, I think that, the best form of advocacy is really in our day-to-day interaction with people, that individual impact. And as much as it's about me sharing, I'm also like learning a lot at the same time. So that is what keeps me going, yeah.
Thank you, Vanira. One of the questions was, how could online services better help migrant and refugee young people? So,
Okay, I'll start. I think we need to recognise that online services can be a wonderful mechanism, that often they need to think about how they're getting their message out, because an anonymous online service can be great. But again, for many groups that are suspicious of the mainstream system, word of mouth connection through trust building is probably a better way to do it. So you need to operate them both at the same time.
Okay, thanks. I guess one question goes for our jigsaw guy. It's about what are some of the main things that annoy you about youth mental health service as a YAC member? What are they?
Great question.
Well, I might start by saying that nothing annoys me about Jigsaw because Jigsaw is perfect. But no, so some things like that might come up is if an adult in the service isn't particularly trained in dealing with young people, they can sometimes come across as a little patronizing. And sometimes, even though you might have what you regard as a great idea, because you're not, say, professionally accredited with a degree that they might have, they kind of can sometimes, just kind of disregard. Now, luckily, the adults I've dealt with along the way have always been supportive, and I think the YAP that I'm particularly part of is quite an incubator for good ideas and for really pushing you to the best of your ability. 2 years ago when I started, never would I have imagined that I'd be sitting here on a stage talking in front of, this crowd. There is that, but overall, there's not too many things that annoy me about being involved.
Is it okay if I quickly add to that?
Yeah, of course.
I must say that just being on a youth advisory group, and one of the things that annoys me and a lot of other young members is that in the mental health system, tokenism when you're from a refugee and migrant background is a really big problem. That annoys me. So when professionals invite young people into a room, take maybe one or two things or use them as a checkbox, kind of like we're ticking off the list, we've talked to you and that's it. That's not how it should be done. And one of the great things that we got to do was actually the ability to co-design a program with professionals and say, this is what we think it should have looked like. So putting young people, making sure that whatever it is that you're trying to do is actually youth-led, you're actually giving them the power instead of asking them to come to a reference group and just taking a few sentences, makes all of the difference.
I think that's a really powerful message, because yesterday when I was part of a workshop and that we were talking with Rachel Piper in terms of that co-production piece, and where just consulting, which is literally like where you're talking about the tick box exercise versus moving all the way right up from participation to co-production, and it's trying to get to that point where there's true co-production rather than, as you say, some tokenism along the way. And I think there are lots of learnings, and particularly I think a lot of experts here in this conference that actually genuinely engage with that co-production piece. I think that's a really powerful piece.
Actually, I would like just jump in about this question that when it comes to annoying something, because I had a problem when I came back from the last conference in Dublin. But my professors from my faculty of political science were asking me, why did you organize a conference on that kind of issue? And that was kind of annoying to me. I mean, the questions that are asking all the time. When it comes to the youth mental health. So no, actually, I think in Bosnia, no one takes it seriously, and that is the real thing that drives me crazy. But yeah, we should proceed. And Nawira, the next question is addressed to you, and it said like this: Nawira, what is a story of recovery that you have heard that really stayed with you? Is there some?
I don't think I can pick one because there are a lot of stories that I hear, or people I've met who continue to inspire me. And earlier when I talked about the book that we just published, so I edited that book, right? And these are stories from people I thought I knew, like my own peers, my own friends. But just reading their story and how they got through everything, it made me realize how little I know, about these people who I thought I knew. And yet like even then, like I discovered so much about them just through their stories. But if I had to talk about one story, something that's coming to my mind right now, because I mean I'm supposed to be at work, right? Okay, no, it's Sunday, but yeah. So I left work to attend this conference, and I think there's this peer that I support in our ward, and okay, I would say he's like going through his recovery now. He's on his way, his recovery journey. But it started with like him always lying on the sofa, and like whenever you see him, he's just there, and he's like, I think if you came in the morning and you come again in the evening, you would think that he did not move at all. And so everyone else, like all the other professionals that I work with, said like, I think it's so hard for him to recover, like he's not gonna do it, like we've been trying but nothing's happening, nothing's working and all that, right? And sometimes even when I approach him to like, ask like, do you wanna talk? And he's like, no. And he does it with his eyes closed. So, yeah, literally people think that he's not putting in enough effort. But there was one day when I asked him like, do you wanna talk? And he said yes, and I was like, okay. Oh yeah, okay, so that was a very like, I don't know, for me it meant a lot. And then he spoke to me for 45 minutes, and he shared that the reason like he's always like sleeping, to everyone else it looks like he's not doing anything, he's just lying there on the couch, is because he wants to avoid having to deal with schizophrenia, because it's not something that he likes, no one likes it, right? But it's not something that's easy for him to deal with. So to everyone else, it seems like he's not putting in effort, but I think how much effort do we put in like asking the person what's going on? And until we really heard from him, like we knew like what was going on. And then now he's really like, he just started his training like, to work at this place that he wanted to work at. He's still going through a trial period. But to go from that, and this is like within the span of like a few weeks, like to go from that to suddenly, like working and all that, I don't know what like motivated him to do that. But I think, this is what inspires me, and this is one story that I will always remember, to never underestimate what someone is capable of, and that recovery is possible for everyone. And it's really a journey. I don't think you are ever at this position where you can say like, I'm there, I'm done, because we are all in a work in progress. To me, that is recovery. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Thanks.
We'll move to the next question, and I think this is probably for either one of you. How can we move past cultural competency and move towards a community of mental health practitioners that are accepting of ethno-cultural differences?
That is a great question, and one that troubles many of us. There's a couple of things I wanted to say. One is that we have to begin by looking into ourselves. Like, I've worked with young people of refugee and migrant backgrounds all my life for 30 years, and I don't think there is not a week that doesn't go by where I say, I have learnt something new, because you have to look into yourself, you have to deal with your own unconscious bias that is there no matter how we think we open we are, and then to develop curiosity. I noticed someone said that this morning as well, about asking questions. And what I've learned really powerfully is the issue of sharing our learnings, but also sharing what we think we have tried that hasn't worked. I think there isn't a culture of doing that, and to recognise there is no magic recipe. But again, I go back to, we need to work together. We need to be collaborative, and we need to problem solve this together.
I would say exactly the same thing, but I think, so as Carmel mentioned, we had the opportunity to do some work with Origin, and we ran a range of research consultations with young people to ask them exactly this question: what kind of a worker do you want? What is it that hasn't worked? What has worked in the past? And I think one of the most beautiful and special outcomes from that was, one of the young people said, I just want someone who wants to know about me. I don't want them to say, oh, okay, so you're Indian, so maybe it's like you have a really hard household, and just come in with that assumption. And a few of them actually said the health practitioner was surprised that they spoke English so well, which is concerning because you really shouldn't. But I think it's really special that someone said, I just want them to get to know me, because we just need to remember that you don't need to have a special university degree in diversity and inclusion just to work with someone who doesn't look like you and isn't from the same place. We just need to exercise some common sense, mutual respect, and create a safe space and a connection with that person to demonstrate, yes, I'm here to listen to you and I want to learn from you. I don't know everything, and we'll work on this together. And that's going to be a continuous process. It's not just a static thing that you can build a foundation for and just assume everything can keep going from there.
That's fantastic.
Thanks, Fatih. I think the next question is addressing all of us, actually. First of all, great presentation. Thanks for acknowledging the detrimental impact of racism on mental health. My question is this. What can we all do to get gatekeepers to understand the incredible importance of taking action against structural racism and creating safe space for non-white people in predominantly white mental health spaces? Who would like to answer that?
I might just quickly say, one way of kind of tackling this would be to get young people who have unfortunately suffered racism to share their stories with the people that they're trying to change their minds about. I feel sometimes people can be blind to things, even though it's right in front of their face, and do need for someone to actually say, this has actually happened to me, and could you do something about changing it?
I love this question. And I have to say, I really like even in our advisory group, we've been talking a lot about this idea of what it is to have a safe space, whether that be online or your physical safe space. And I know for me personally, when I talked about my journey, the only time that I could really become an advocate and grow into that was when I found my safe space. And to me, that was the young people in my advisory group. That was my safe space for the past 2 years, because it was the first time I'd been in a space with young people where there were so many people of colour, and I wasn't the only non-white person in a room wanting to do something relevant to social justice. It was very rare, but more than that, they were willing to be openly vulnerable about what it is that was going on with them, and had a shared intention to be vulnerable, put forward whatever trauma it is that they'd gone through, and say enough is enough. I've had enough of waiting and expecting things to change. We're the ones that need to put this forward. So when we talk about identifying and challenging structural racism, it's about actually I think we need to be really blatantly honest with ourselves about the reality of things. Australia's not very good at it, and I would encourage everyone to watch the Adam Goodes documentary. It's really great, but I think it really puts in perspective the state of how we deal with racism in this country itself.
Fantastic. Thank you.
I would just like to add something. I'm coming from the country that's in the Western Balkan regions, like Eastern Europe. So majority of people are the same color of the skin. And one thing that really shocked me. The young brother of my friend was on some school holiday in the Montenegro, and they were in someone city, and they saw an African-American person. They want to take a picture with him just because he is an Afro-American. So it takes you, it's different from country to country. In one country, for example, in Bosnia, for some people can be funny, what is really offensive. In other, we have dealing with that, but yeah, that I want to say. It's really, feel
And can
bad.
I add a bit to that? I think the other challenge on this issue is that I do start, because I'm an internal optimist, that people want to do this. I think the struggle for many of the organisations we partner with, they don't know how and don't know beyond, can you tell me your story and join my youth advisory group? And when someone says that, I'll say, yeah, thank you, but can we start at the beginning? Which is, what are you going to do when we even bring this young person to your service? Because that's the other lesson we've learned, is it doesn't matter how open you are initially, because I come from the right place, this is an organisational rethinking about who talks to young people, who talks to the family, who's a practitioner who talks to them. So it really is a questioning of beyond that. So I think that we start from, you ask the question and then your work begins. But what I struggle with is not enough professionals ask the question. They assume because you're a youth service that you're open to all young people. We need to start with that question.
Great. I'm going to move to our next question. Are there any suggestions for schools about how to engage with young carers who assess supporting a parent or family member with mental illness, often when our knowledge of this family challenge is unknown? So that's, I suppose, maybe you're carers but not knowing. So I presume you probably best speak to that.
Yeah.
We very eloquently earlier kind of addressed this issue.
Unfortunately, I know too many young people who were in circumstances similar to mine, and not just with mental illness, but there might have been matters of domestic violence, parents with gambling addictions, parents struggling with substance abuse, and a whole range of other things. But Schools are sometimes the only safe place that these young people have to stay safe and be away from those environments. And I think the government needs to have a really hard look at where they put their funding and how they make services more accessible, because we can go on and on about improving accessibility. What is it that we need to do for refugee and migrant young people? And especially for carers, there is an added layer of complexity, because there's their issues, but then there's also the issues and the identity of the person that you're caring for. So I think we need to become a lot better at working with schools to embed mental health practitioners within them, and creating an environment that's safe enough for that young person to speak openly with their teachers and make that disclosure. Because I can guarantee that, especially for a community like mine in the Indian community where mental health isn't so openly spoken about, it's still such a matter of shame. It has a lot attached to it, and there's so much at stake. Your reputation is at stake, for example. And I know it was at a lot of great personal expense to me in the beginning when I first started to speak more openly about this, that, what would people think of my family? Am I putting them at risk? So that young person at school isn't going to speak up about it if they're terrified of those things, and if they're worried that they might get their family into trouble, which is often a really big concern that people seem to overlook. And I think that we need to work with those communities themselves, we need to talk to the schools, and we need to actually be better at just putting mental health practitioners in a place that's easy for the young person to access, and where they can have direct and regular contact with them in that safe space. Because I know for me that was the only thing that saved me.
Thanks, Swati. I think we have time just for one more.
23 seconds.
23 seconds.
I think we're going to have to call a halt. And maybe it's a good place to end on that, because on a personal story and your voice in that. So do you want to thank everybody here? I've spoken enough. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually,
close then.
Actually 5, 4. Session is closing in 3 seconds, and I would really like to answer this question, because can I at least read it?
You can read it, yes.
Sorry, because this
Those guys over there are going to tell us off the stage right now.
Sorry, because it's addressing Australia. I don't know why. I mean, the question was, how can we support people from collectivist, family, community-focused ideologies to navigate Australia's individual focus system? I think it's addressing all the countries, not just Australia. So we're going to discuss about that after the session. So thanks everyone for joining this session, and see you later.
I have an announcement to make. Yeah. On behalf of Pat, I think when Pat McGarry asks you to make an announcement, you do the announcement. Okay. So, 2 things. Firstly, just to let everybody know that the AGM for the IAYMH is on tomorrow morning at 8:15 to 8:45 up in M3. Secondly, there is a youth gathering later this afternoon hosted by jack.org at the Plough Inn on South Bank. And most importantly, Pat wanted me to draw your attention to a report that's going to be released tomorrow, which was commissioned by Louise Walsh and Future Generations. It's a report that's commissioned through EY, Ernst & Young, and it's Australia's mental health crisis, why private funders are not answering the call, and that it will be picked up by The Australian tomorrow. So he really wanted me to draw your attention to that particular report. And I think that draws this session to a close. I want to thank everybody that was here, both you and our panel, for engaging with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.